People who learn improv are just so great at brainstorming, at listening, coming up with new ideas. They're so playful. As adults, we stop like being playful often. And you look at kids are so good at just losing themselves in the moment
Yeah.
and being imaginative, and adults have a hard time doing that.
There's something,
So
well, it's,
people
you have to be vulnerable, right? You have to be vulnerable to put yourself out there. I think that's one of the scariest things. So, I don't know what age that happens. Maybe it's like 18, 19, and then we start getting fear, maybe even teenagers. I don't know, because you start worrying about people think about you. And yeah, you lose that playful side. There's so much more with that I want to talk to you about. But I had a question. Do you have to be funny to do improv? I mean, do you have to be a funny person to get into it?
That's such a good question. The answer, you don't. Well, I also would say everyone has funny in them. Some people it's harder to find for whatever reason, but it's all in there. It's all in there. So improv classes, you do learn comedy techniques. I'm not going to sit here and say that you won't come out of an improv class funnier. But if you go into the improv class thinking that it is exclusively about being funny, you're going to have a hard time. It's way more about communication techniques and being open-minded and
And listening.
practicing presence and listening. You're right.
Listening, that is another thing that is so, it's really hard for people to do. And what I notice, I mean, not just on the stage when we were doing improv, but also in real life, we're constantly thinking, what am I going to say next? How am I going to contribute to this conversation? And so we kind of tune the other person out and then just think about what can I contribute, rather than actually listening to the person and taking what they say and then that kind of gauging then how to change, right? So that listening is one of the biggest things I think I learned on your stage.
Big time. I mean, how often do you hear adults talk about how like compliment each other on listening? Or like how
Yeah.
often are we working on that? Improv makes you work on it. You can't be good at this art form and be a bad listener. You have to stay present. And also, isn't like being present and staying in the moment and mindfulness, like these are all things that are so important to us as people. But aside from like a couple meditation apps or maybe some yoga practices, like how often are we really diving deep on being the kind of person who prioritizes presence? And in improv, you have to stay glued to the moment. Otherwise, you're going to sink and it's not going to be fun and you won't thrive in it. But if you just give a little bit of uh, energy to listening and staying in the moment, you will surprise yourself with how funny you actually are. I've seen it happen a million times.